Hey guys, so one question that keeps coming up is, how much progress should I be seeing right now? Or how can I ramp up my progress? And so I just wanted to answer that question today because, again, it's going to vary a lot from person to person. But I will say, in general, I don't really get concerned if someone's not seeing progress until we get through all of the food choice habits. So, what I mean by that is, habits that discuss the food choices you make. So we've just started that with protein, and pretty soon we'll get into veggies and carbs and fats and things like that. So once we get through all of those habits, that's at that point, that's when I would say most should start seeing progress. But if you don't, it's just feedback. It doesn't mean you're doing the habits wrong. It just means that you may need to adjust your strategy a little bit. And we do know that if your weight is not going down, and that's the goal, then we still need to decrease food intake in some way, or energy intake, I should say, in some way. And that's much easier said than done, obviously. But that is going to be the strategy. And there's different ways of doing that. But one of the easiest ways, is just largely relying on lean proteins and veggies. Because you can imagine, you can eat a huge plate of lean protein and a veggie, or something like Greek yogurt and berries. You can eat a bunch of that as compared to, like a sandwich and chips, or, cereal, or, something like that. So, when I say you have to cut back on your food intake, I don't necessarily mean the volume of food. I more mean the energy that's contained within it. And that's why whole foods are a much better option. Now, an important thing to realize is to start from where you're at. So if right now you're relying mostly on, processed foods, or foods that have multiple ingredients, I don't expect you to completely change everything right now. If you can just make a small change towards better, that's awesome. And that's always the goal with this program. It's never meant to be a complete 180 from your routine, because a lot of times that's just not sustainable. So as I always say, I don't like to get ahead of the habits. So for now, I want you to focus on the habits that we have thus far. But, if you feel like, for example, if we're on protein and that feels like an easy habit for you, maybe, review your intake a little bit, what you're consuming, and consider, some other factors you might be able to change. Again, don't overwhelm yourself. Make the PN habits the priority. I want you to be doing well with those first. But if you feel up to it, I'm okay with you tackling something else. Now, some people will make progress right away. And this is why I say it really depends on just what the person's limiting factor is. So for example, if someone, already does well with protein and carbs and fats and all that, they may not see progress right away. For them, it may be sleep or stress management, something like that, which, we actually address that later in the program. That may be their limiting factor. So for them, they may not see progress until we get towards those habits, and that may be later in the year. And that's okay. I know it's hard to wait, but the better you can set that foundation, then the easier it's going to be in the long run, because fat loss does not have to take that long once you get it all dialed in. I know we want to get that sprint and get it over and get it done, but what happens when you lose all that weight? You have to keep up with the habits, or you unfortunately will gain it back. I mean, you have to mainly eat a similar way as what you do when you lose weight. And if you don't have those habits built, then you're not going to sustain it. So it's important to lay that foundation first and to take things as they come. But again, you can use the scale as feedback. It is telling you roughly your energy intake. It isn't telling you if you're not eating healthy, because again, you may be eating like a very healthy, nutritious diet, but it may be an amount that's just right for you to maintain your weight. And that's actually a really valuable skill to have. is being able to eat at maintenance. So don't see that as failure. It's just feedback that you do need to decrease your energy intake a little bit. But don't push that. If you're not eating very good foods right now, it's going to be hard to decrease your intake because you're going to feel like you're eating so very little. Again, a sandwich and chips is not very satiating. If you try to cut that down and eat half a sandwich and chips, you're going to be ravenous very soon. So again, the more you can work on food choices first, that's going to really help you cut back on your intake in a more sustainable way. Now, if you haven't watched my video on scale fluctuations and things like that, I would definitely recommend checking that out, because in that video I discuss why I don't like to, you can't necessarily assume you're not losing weight if the scale has plateaued for 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks. So definitely watch that video. So as I mentioned in that video, I like guys to weigh themselves fairly often, 4 or 5, 6, 7 times a week. Take the average over those days, and at the end of the week, you'll have an average weight. And you can compare that weight over time, and you can get an idea of the trend. But I don't read much into that until I see 3 to 4 weeks of consistent, weigh-ins, and that gives me a good idea of the trend. But again, I don't really expect that trend to be going down right now for everyone. It may for some of you. Again, if you hadn't been eating protein at all, well, now including protein may be helping you be way more satiated, maybe crowding out other foods you were reaching for. So that's why we see a huge discrepancy between guys in terms of how much they lose at first. But later in the year, it tends to level out because, later in the year, if protein was that guy's kind of limiting factor, probably stuff later on is not going to be the limiting factor. Okay, so it just depends on, what you need to improve. So I hope this was helpful. I'm happy to help you brainstorm if you feel like, you're stuck, but I encourage you to review your own situation first. If you were your own coach, what would you tell yourself? But I'm not going to get ahead of the habit. So, if you feel like you need to work on your fat intake, or you need to work on your sleep or something like that, I'm not going to get ahead of the lessons, but it is something you can start working on yourself if you feel ready for it. Okay. So, one last thing. Lastly, in terms of realistic expectations, what is maximally possible to lose is roughly 1% of your body weight a week on average. Okay, so I get some guys who have unrealistic expectations. They're dropping weight at a pretty good rate, but they think it should be faster. If you try to go faster than that, you're going to risk losing muscle tissue. So 1% of your body weight is a pretty good estimate, and I'll help you guys, keep an eye on that. I always review that when I look at your intakes. So again, make sure you're filling out your progress reports, because I do keep an eye on those. Okay. So yeah, I think that was everything. I know this is kind of long. I hope it was helpful, and take care, guys.